to join us tonight. This is a series run by Goldfields Libraries, and my name's Lucy Mays. I'm the Manager of Engagement for Goldfields Libraries. And I'd like to, before we go further, acknowledge the country that I'm joining you from, but I'd also like to acknowledge the country that you're joining us from. And if you'd like to pop in the chat box where you are, traditional owner lands. I'm on the lands of the Djadja people. I'd love to know where you're joining us from tonight. And on behalf of Goldfields Libraries, I'd like to acknowledge the deeply held wisdom, customs and traditions and custodianship of the lands and waterways of our traditional owners. And I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and anyone present of Aboriginal descent. Thank you. So this is an event called Fill Your Cup, Self-Care and Wellbeing During Tough Times. And my word, it has been a tough time. And this is a particularly special event tonight because it's part of a partnership project with the City of Greater Bendigo for a series of events and initiatives called Bendigo Cares. And what that's based on is an understanding or an acknowledgement, wanting to acknowledge and recognise the work that carers do. Extraordinarily challenging work at times, I'm sure incredibly rewarding work also, but we wanted to just recognise that enormous contribution and offer some opportunities for sharing of story, of experiences, and for connecting through wellbeing. And so tonight's activity, of course, is a wellbeing activity, but we've got some other initiatives. We'll have some journal writing workshops coming up and a comedy and cake morning when hopefully we can return to face-to-face events and service delivery. We've also got an initiative that we'd like to let you know about, and please let us know if anybody in your circles could do with a bit of a care pack. So any carers who live in the Bendigo region who you think could do with a little care pack or a helping hand, or even yourself, if you'd like to receive a little package in the mail, please let us know. We've popped the details for the contact point there into the chat group, but it's Lee at Eaglehawk Library, and there's a phone number there and an email address. So Shobi, I'm really delighted that you've been able to join us tonight. Thank you so much. Shobi Owen works at the Anna Centre. She's a social worker and she's worked in South America and Central Australia, amongst other interesting places. And she, generally speaking, has worked with people who have experienced family breakdown, trauma, addictions, mental illness or homelessness. And she's worked across a lot of demographics as well. And so I'll hand over to you, Shobi, to perhaps introduce yourself in a bit more detail. But we're so grateful for your time tonight and your experience and the wisdom that you're going to be able to bring to us and our carers and everybody else who's here with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. It's such a privilege and an honour to be here today to share, via Zoom and to engage with people who are, really taking on this role of carer in such a difficult time. And that might look different for different people, whether you're an engaged carer with a loved one with mental illness or someone who's, experiencing chronic illness. But yeah, just hats off to you for what you're doing in this time. Yes, as Lucy mentioned, I've worked in various communities across Australia and internationally amongst people who have experienced various levels of trauma, Indigenous communities, and now I find myself in Central Victoria raising my 3 girls and working at the Anna Centre as a counsellor and a therapist. So yeah, it's really a privilege to journey with people on a day-to-day basis. And, the onset of the pandemic has been a particularly devastating time for many people, but also there's been lots of conversations around hope and creativity and other things that, have come up during that time. So, yeah, it's an honour to be here tonight.
Thank you, Shobi. And I wonder if you could just give us a quick little snapshot or outline of what to expect in this next hour together tonight so people know what's coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you mentioned that the session is called Fill Your Cup, Self-Care and Wellbeing During Tough Times. So we'll have a little bit of a look at stress and what causes stress and what comes up in us, I guess, physiologically, neurologically when we experience stress. How we can incorporate an idea of well-being into our daily structure on a day-to-day basis. We'll look at things, a little bit of psychoeducation around the brain, and look at some things that we could put in our schedule to ensure that we are maintaining a healthy balance and working towards not, I guess, the idea or the elusive goal of happiness, but the idea of building a life that's full of meaning and purpose in this time.
Beautiful, thank you. And again, just coming back to our theme around carers, you know, it's so easy to put others first, especially when their needs are perhaps more demanding or loud than our own needs, but we just can't keep going, can we, sometimes, if we're not putting our needs ahead as well at times. And I take my hat off to people who are caring in really complex and tricky situations. I'm a mother, so I do call myself a carer, but I don't consider it to be particularly challenging, although these times are challenging for all of us. But I was up all night last night with my daughter, so I'm feeling particularly like a carer who needs some self-care tonight. So forgive me if I lose train of thought or garble my words, but it feels very timely, this workshop, so I'm looking forward to it. Shobi, thank you. Perhaps you could kick us off by just explaining to us or helping us to understand a bit more about what stress is.
Yeah, absolutely, Lucy. And also, if anyone has questions, I'm not sure, I think I can see them coming up in the little dialogue box, so feel free to put them in at any time, and Lucy, you might be able to keep a track of them as well.
Yeah.
But if we look at stress and the idea of what is stress, I guess it's defined as more or less as a biological and psychological response to demand. So essentially that is how our body responds physiologically to demand and how it responds neurologically to demand. And these are two kind of different things. They may be the demands of being a carer in everyday life, to people who have illness, or it can be something like demands can be work schedules or finances or what to cook for dinner tonight. All sorts of demands that, you know, we encounter cause us stress. So we have inbuilt biological responses to stress, and it's interesting in order to examine this more closely, I think we need to take a step back in time. For those of you who don't resonate with evolution, I apologise, because I will be talking to that concept a little bit, but you can also probably envisage a different framework for it, in that our mind is geared to do a certain job, and our top job, the top job of our mind, is to keep us safe, so to be on the lookout for danger and to alert us to what we need to do in order to keep safe. So the reason that we experience stress is if we take a step back in time and we look back to our caveman ancestors, they had a single purpose in life, and it was to keep safe. Of course, there was essential needs. There was the need for shelter, food, warmth, sex, reproduction, and those sorts of things. But there was no good. There's no good in engaging in those pursuits if you're dead. So essentially, the top job was to keep them safe. So if you were a caveman, or you can imagine your caveman ancestor in their cave, and you're sharpening your tools and you're thinking about what you need to do in the upcoming days or weeks, where you need to go and hunt and find that amazing, you know, food that fed your family for a month. You're doing all that in a part of your brain which is called the prefrontal cortex, or the higher brain. All of a sudden, a saber-toothed tiger appears outside of your cave. And immediately what happens to your brain is that the higher brain goes offline, and you engage what's called the limbic brain, or the primitive brain. And that you might know as your response, fight, flight, or freeze. So you engage in this part of your brain. The problem is, hundreds and thousands of years later, we have evolved and quite complex kind of brains now, and we have the capacity to, you know, reason and be creative and sing a sonnet and recite a poem or crack a joke, and you know, we don't really need to engage regularly in this fight, flight, freeze response. Yet when we experience stress, we go there. Our bodies naturally go into this fight, flight, freeze response. You might notice things like heavy breathing and elevated heart rate. Those are, you know, basically cortisol or adrenaline building up in our bodies. You might notice at times even your tummy goes a little bit funny, and there's actually a really good reason for that, which is really quite interesting. It's because your digestive system, when you're in fight or flight, is the last thing you actually need in order to survive. You don't need to be able to digest food in order to run up that tree. So what happens is that the caveman then engages in the fight with the saber-toothed tiger. So we go into fight and we beat him up and we lose an eye as a result. But we save ourselves, and then we come back to our cave, and what we do is we actually think about the fight, everything that went on in that moment. If I had have just done that better or done that move better, I wouldn't have lost my eye, and we ruminate. Or the other response is that we think about the future and we worry about it. What's going to happen if he comes back again? What if I don't have that swing down pat? You know, and the other thing, the thing that's interesting about this is that we do this in our modern world, you know, but it's no longer the saber-toothed tiger that's the problem. It's, how am I going to respond to the needs of my 3 children tomorrow? How am I going to go through another day of home learning, let alone care for myself? How am I going to, you know, help the person that I'm caring for? I can't handle another, you know, so we ruminate or we worry about the future. And this is actually a normal biological response to stress. We are not defective. We are simply doing what we are biologically destined to do in the light of stress.
I was just going to say, it's thank you. Sorry,
that's all right.
You know, I was just, you mentioned in the modern context, and I was just thinking about the context that we find ourselves in at the moment. And to me, the experiences are a lot less resonant with the metaphor of the tiger, because the tiger makes you think, you know, it's an immediate moment of stress and you're having an immediate response. Whereas what I'm finding about the environment that we're living in at the moment is it's sort of like this drip, 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 and you wouldn't know, like it's almost this subversive stress.
Yes.
And we possibly could be forgiven for not knowing that we're even facing a stressful situation. That sounds a bit silly to say, because of course we all know we're in stressful times, but I think I've read some articles about how this coronavirus time is causing us all to sort of go into some kind of mental shutdown where we're on our limited responses, because we can't cope with the onslaught of constant negativity, uncertainty, fear, and you know, and I think, you know, the environment and changing environmental conditions are another slow drip stress point that people experience. Along with day-to-day realities that don't depend on the bigger, wider outside world, but happen, you know, in our own smaller little family worlds and circumstances as well, of course. But anyway, I just wondered if you had something to say about that in relation to this biological mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess there's an idea or an understanding around a body of science that suggests that 95% of our psychological suffering comes from being hooked by negative thoughts, feelings, or situations. So they can be, being hooked can look like being a heightened state of stress, but it can also be an avoidant kind of a connection with our reality. So part of what combats stress is undermining these things that naturally want to go towards a heightened experience of stress or an avoidant experience of stress. And I thought I could do a little exercise to sort of to illustrate this. If people want to join in, I can't actually see anyone's faces. You can just see a lovely picture of a rose and Lucy there. But if you want to imagine, and what you're saying, the avoidance part of it is also can be like a slow drip sensation. No matter what's happening, even if we're avoidant, we're actually engaging with the thought process. And that's what we've got to become aware of and bring attention to. So if we just want to do this example, it'll just take a couple of minutes, and I want you to just take a deep breath and breathe out. And just look around the room that you're in and imagine that this room represents everything that brings your life meaning. That may be that your children, the sunshine, your garden, your hobbies, anything that brings your life purpose and meaning. Now I want you to put your hands in front of you, just cupped out in front of you like this. And I want you to imagine that your hands represent your negative thoughts or avoidant feelings and sensations that you might experience on a day-to-day basis. Now, looking at the room again, I want you to take your hands and put them up in front of your face slowly with your fingers slightly parted. You might not be able to hear me that well because I'm a bit muffled. Now I want you to look at the room again. And basically just tell me what you notice about your view currently. If people want to type in a couple of responses or say them out loud, that's fine.
We've got blocked, filtered.
Yeah, blocked and filtered. I thought they were actually internet terms. I was thinking, oh, this person's blocked and filtered. Yes, absolutely right. Your view is blocked. It's filtered. It's distorted. You can't really see clearly, can you? How well can you have a conversation with your loved one with your hands up in front of your face like this? You know, how well can you cuddle your baby or your toddler who's having a tantrum with your hands like this? So the idea is that when we become hooked to these negative thoughts and feelings and sensation, it actually stops us from engaging with the things that matter to us in a meaningful way. Does anyone have any queries or thoughts or doubts at this point?
I've got a comment from a little earlier before the activity, but I wonder if it's relevant here. Agreeing with what we were saying about not necessarily realising when we're not coping.
Yes.
So, for example, listening to the news and there's constant political argy-bargy and blaming going on, and this person finds themselves crying sometimes. I wonder if you would have anything to say about this metaphor, but us not even realising that our fingers, are blocking or filtering or narrowing our view.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's a really good point. And where I was going with this, and you probably, jump 2 steps ahead, is actually that the relationship between our limbic brain and our higher brain is developing something called the noticer or the observer self. Sometimes we're so caught here and we're hooked, like you can imagine a hook in the back of our heads, and that's what our thoughts do, and they drag us from place to place, and we don't even know they're happening to us. We just accept them, and we don't even accept them. We're just not even really aware. So the key to developing this relationship between your limbic brain, which is your kind of freeze, and avoidance can be a kind of frozen state as well, is developing the capacity to notice what's going on in here. And when we can notice our thoughts, we can actually develop the capacity to more quickly jump online back to our higher brain, the place where we connect with our values and the things that are important to us in our life. Because when we're in the limbic brain, we can't do any of that. So I want to do maybe another little exercise that will help us identify the noticer or find out where the noticer is in our lives or in our heads or in our brains. So if you imagine that you are in a speech bubble above yourself and you're really kind of pointing the finger at yourself or telling yourself some messages, and they're often negative messages. We're actually wired to create 5 times more negative thoughts than we are positive thoughts, psychologically speaking. That's a statistic. And that's the human mind, the caveman thing about keeping us safe again. We're wired to create this kind of negativity. What would be the top 1 or 2 negative statements that your mind might tell you? And in relation to the pandemic, for me, it's things like, well, I'm never going to see my family, till next year. So, those sorts of statements that come to you. Even the ones that you're referring to there, Lucy, about, that constant drip, drip, drip. What is that drip? What is that thought?
Please share if you'd like to, people in the comments, whatever's coming to you.
You can use I statements. I'm never going to see my family again. When are we ever going to get out of this? They might be comments like that come up during this time. I don't have any more strength to give. I miss hugs. Yeah, absolutely. I'm missing my grandchildren's milestones. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
So those thoughts seep in, they drip feed into our brains, and they can actually cause prolonged stress for ourselves. And the idea behind what I'm referring to, which is largely based on Stephen Hayes's concept of acceptance and commitment therapy, which Russ Harris is a beautiful author who I'll share his book later, talks about this elusive goal of happiness. You know, we're wired, everything in our society gears us towards the fact that one day we can lead a perfect life. And we're just constantly at this point where we're thinking, when can I begin to live this wonderful life? But ACT therapy, or acceptance and commitment therapy, which I work predominantly out of, encourages us to undermine those feelings of avoidance. Will I get, what was that one again? Will I get to see my grandmother or something?
Will I get to hug my new grandbabies due in the
Will
next
I
3
get to
months in
hug
Tasmania? Oh.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. So developing the noticer is a really important part of actually dropping back into ourselves and understanding that we need to create room to experience these feelings. Because there's a kind of elusive goal of happiness, everything in us wants to push away these uncomfortable feelings of unhappiness, of guilt, of sadness, of shame. But ACT therapy encourages us to open up our hearts to create room for the unpleasant stuff, acknowledge them, and thereby reduce their frequency and intensity. It's like when you try and I'll give another example. So just pretend that you're hosting a party and you've set up everything for the party. You've got the food and, you know, the stereo system and all your wonderful friends, you know, they're there and they're partying away. And then there's this little kind of character that's, we'll just call him Dumbo Depression. And he's kind of a mate of yours who's a little bit awkward and, you know, he smells a bit funny and doesn't really fit in with the crowd. And he knocks at your door and you say, gosh, I really don't want you here. And you run to the door and you close the door and you block him out. And then you kind of come back in and he knocks at the door again and you have to leave the party again. And you say, you really can't be here. I don't want you here. And you lock him out again. You come back to the party, everything's going well. And then he beats the door down and you push him out and you stand at the door for the entire party and you just block him out. And you realize, yeah, it's good that he's not here at the party. However, I'm missing out on all the fun. So when we spend our time trying to avoid or push away these unpleasant and negative sensations, we can't actually engage in the things that matter to us because we're so caught up here, we're hooked. So developing the noticer, there's a really, really beautiful little one-step exercise that you can do. And I encourage you to get your top negative phrase, your negative statement, or, you know, your sad statement, or whatever it is that your mind is telling you, and to say it to yourself in your head. So, will I ever get to cuddle my grandbabies? Can you think of any others, Lucy?
We've got a few actually coming in from the YouTube chat.
Yes.
We've got I'm not good enough, imposter syndrome.
I'm not good enough. Yes.
Yep. And another one, this pandemic has made me extremely depressed at times. And all but one of her 8 kids live on the mainland, so has no idea when they'll see each other again, makes her very sad.
Absolutely. And the idea, when we become hooked by these negative thoughts, they start as a thought and we become hooked by them. And then we start to do one of two things. We can either make towards moves, which move us in the direction of our goals and values, or we can make away moves. And they're directly related to how hooked or unhooked we are with these negative thoughts and feelings and sensations. When we are hooked by our negative thoughts and feelings, it's much easier to make those away moves. I'll just eat that 3rd chocolate bar because I know that sugar rush is going to give me some immediate comfort. I'll just drink probably 3 more glasses of wine because I know I'll sleep it off. Those away moves, or whatever we identify as away moves, become more possible when we are hooked with these thoughts. When we can unhook, it's easier to make those moves that lead us in the direction of our values. Yes, I acknowledge that I miss my grandchildren, but you know what? I'm going to actually write them that card and I'm going to do that thing that helps me feel connected to them because that's my value. So developing the noticer, let's get back to that point for a minute. Now, I want you to identify and connect with that statement. I am worthless. I'll never get to hug my grandbabies, and just keep that in your mind. And then I want you to really become hooked by that thought for a minute. Become hooked by that feeling that encompasses your body. What's happening in your body? Is your heart kind of racing? Is your stomach churning? Is your mind kind of exploding? Is it like a heavy lead plate on your chest? And these are all examples of what my clients tell me. Some people feel like it's a steel wrecking ball, or a what's that bomby knocker one someone said, yeah, with the spikes on it, just sitting there in your chest. I want you to breathe into that feeling. I'm worthless. I'll never get to hug my grandbabies. When will this end? Now I want you to say this thought again to yourself, but this time I want you to put this phrase in front of it. And it goes like this. I notice I'm having the thought that. And then repeat your phrase. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm worthless. I notice I'm having the thought that this will never end. I notice I'm having the thought that I'll never get to hug my grandbabies in a hurry. I notice I'm having the thought that I'll miss all of the milestones. Can anyone comment on any differences they notice between the first time just being hooked with thought and the second time adding the notice a sentence in front of it? Was there any difference for anyone?
We'll just give people a chance to respond.
Did anyone notice a little bit more distance between themselves and that thought?
Definitely for me, yeah.
Or a little more detachment maybe from that self-concept of worthlessness. Yes, distancing, yeah.
And uncouples the energy from the thought. Oh, I like that, yeah. Thanks, Gordon.
I didn't see that one. Yeah, that's great. Uncouples the energy from the thought. Absolutely. So
another one. Sorry, another one here.
I can't see these coming in, sorry, but that's great that you can.
Yep. Adding the phrase shifts the focus. So similar comment. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I guess the whole point of doing this is understanding that we're not defective and we are not our thoughts ultimately. That's a phrase I often write up on the whiteboard. You are not your thoughts. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that expression in wisdom traditions or meditation, where you look at, the thoughts are like the sky and the clouds, and they just move, they move along, they move through, or like the weather, it changes.
Thoughts come
unbidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good phrase.
Yeah, and when we can understand that our mind is naturally geared and wired biologically, and in a sense of that evolution sense, to create this psychological suffering, we can breathe a deep sigh of relief because we are not the only ones in the world that this is happening to. At the end of the day, when I've had a full day of clients, oh, my beautiful radio doom and gloom comes on. You're a terrible therapist. What did you give anyone today? What can anyone take away from this? All of those negative thoughts, feelings, and sensations can hook me. And if I'm like this, I cannot have a lovely conversation with my daughter. I just can't. So unhooking is the first step to being able to be grounded in yourself. And in order to be able to connect with doing what matters and engaging in that self-care stuff.
That's right. Fill yourself up with the stuff that fills you up.
Absolutely. And that's the next step. I employed this today. Somebody said I missed that.
Can you see it? I catastrophized a small irritation and realised what I was doing. I felt it in my chest and I was making my day awful with my kids. When I caught myself, the day started to turn around. Well done. Fantastic.
That's wonderful. Isn't that brilliant? And sometimes catching yourself, even if it's 3/4 of the way through this stuff, that's better than not at all. And this is definitely the importance of observing, developing that observer self. It's almost like you could have a bird's eye view of yourself. You could be up there watching. What are you doing? Oh, actually, if you can catch yourself, I can drop anchor. And this is another one I like to do, is just imagine that you are a boat on the stormy seas and that the wind is tossing the boat around and you cannot tell the weather to stop, but you can drop anchor in that moment and ground yourself and ground the boat in that and to weather the storm.
Yeah.
And when we can drop anchor enough to get back in touch with our higher brain, then we can actually understand, what is it that fills my cup? What brings energy and healing to myself? Actually, it's going out and riding that horse that has been sitting there for, a month without me riding it, or watering that garden, or planting those seedlings, or catching up with that friend, doing that Zoom call, or whatever it is that fills your cup, and building in those things that connect you to your values.
I heard another really lovely and helpful.
Yeah. I can see the comments now.
Good.
Sorry, yeah, Lucy.
Excellent.
What were you saying?
I think I've lost my train of thought. There we go. That's the tired
That's okay.
mother coming out. It'll come back to me.
It's great. When I'm acknowledging that thought, it is making me realize things are not as apocalyptic. And when I acknowledge my thoughts, then I am reasoning and shifting my thoughts. Absolutely. It's because you're not really, you're able to jump back online much more quickly and go, oh, actually, yeah, I've made room for that feeling, and I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. The other trap, and one of the happiness traps that Russ Harris, this beautiful author of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy book, talks about, is that we are naturally wired to create this psychological suffering. So, even we're a little bit wary of trying to create this positive mantra, I will be good, because ultimately the negative thoughts still come flooding back in. What it's trying to do is undermine the avoidant strategies, or the catastrophizing, by noticing them. So
that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Another little metaphor that illustrates that is imagining that you're a bus driver and that you're trying to get from point A to point B. And, there's 3 annoying passengers that get on that bus. One of them's Annie anxiety. The other one is Sally stress and Dumbo depression. And they're all pulling at your hair and trying to get your attention. And you're driving this bus and you're like, oh, I've got to get from A to B. Can't kick them off the bus. We're already in motion. But I'm going to tell them, hey, guys, take a seat. I'm aware that you're here. Put your seatbelt on. I'm going to get to point B. And this is what I need to do. So just creating the room to accept their presence in your life is not going to mean that they overrun you, but it's actually going to reduce their intensity.
Great. Thanks, Shobi. And are there times when stress can be a useful thing, or is there such a thing as good stress?
Yes, there is, Lucy. It's actually called eustress, EUSTRESS. And that's the kind of stress that doesn't cause us, kind of prolonged physiological symptoms. But it's the stuff that makes us go, yeah, I need to actually make that doctor's appointment. Oh, I really need to finish this 5K run. Those things that motivate us to the end of achieving a deadline without causing us incredible duress. Stress becomes a problem when we do this for too long, when we become so hooked that we develop other symptoms. And, there are short and long-term symptoms of stress. And stress has been linked to, heart attacks, hypertension, anxiety, depression, suicidality, all of those things, when we don't develop these strategies to be able to unhook from these unhelpful thoughts.
Yeah, it's extraordinary how stress manifests in our bodies, and again, sometimes sneaky little subversive symptoms that we don't even realise are connected to stress, like headaches or whatever it is. So we've got 20 minutes left, and I'd love to give 10 minutes to questions at least. Although bring us your questions now if you've got something bubbling. But it'd be lovely. We're here to talk about self-care and well-being. So how about we move on to some top tips on how to tackle the stress beast?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear from people about that as well, and to hear what has been helpful for them in this time. What has filled your cup? What do you want more of, if you could dream big?
I'll start, but while people are typing, something that I find really helpful is imagining myself in a joy state or in a bliss state or in a happy place. And so I take myself back to a memory when, you know, I was feeling really fulfilled or something was really beautiful or I was awestruck or whatever it is. And I just try and like embody that, and it actually makes me feel better. It's sort of like, I think I heard somewhere that if you fake smile, your body feels like it's actually smiling. I'm not so good at fake smiling, but I can do that embodiment activity. Walking to the cake shop.
Absolutely. I saw that one. That was a crack up. Johnny Baker's is my local. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Trying to spend a few minutes following a guided meditations each day. Yep, time for me. Fantastic. Yes. Yeah, and you're right there, Lucy, when you mentioned what was it you said about, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now.
The embodiment of
the
joy.
Euphoric state. Yeah, the embodiment of joy. Actually fusing with or being hooked with fantasy or joyful sensations is absolutely helpful and recommended. Like that's a wonderful place, and you can actually change your physiology. Sometimes when you find yourself in this slump state is to embody the physiology of someone who is motivated, who is engaged, who is ready to take on life, and that can actually change how you feel internally.
I read a beautiful book recently just on that, called Phosphorescence, on awe and wonder, and it's taught me to walk around the world in a completely different way, and I can generate that beautiful state of awe just by being in nature. And it's very simple, much more simple than I used to think it had to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you're doing immensely well for being able to embody that sense of presence after a sleepless night, Lucy. That's fantastic. Switching off tech and even the radio, going outside and listening to non-electric stuff. Beautiful. In my sessions with clients, I have a little motto: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When you're feeling stressed, go outside, name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can touch, 1 thing you can taste. It's just a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I love that idea of just going offline and going outside to open up to the world. There's a whole world in this present moment of sensory delight, and being able to do that once or twice a day even. Walk in nature, perfect example. How many bird calls can you hear? I don't even know the names of birds, but, you know, there's a few that I've learnt during the pandemic. Yes.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I can share that in story time. Georgina's revealed her identity. She's one of our story time staff. That's beautiful.
Oh, fantastic.
And I love it. It's great. I use it with my kids too, that one. It's fantastic. Really very helpful. And of course I use it with myself too. Do we have any other top tips about how people look after themselves? I'm wondering, Shobi, if you've got any thoughts. Again, back to our theme around carers. I was listening to the radio, of course, at this time, and it struck me, somebody was commenting on how carers are just an invisible workforce who are isolated at the best of times, and in this time of pandemic are even more isolated and really up against it with, you know, all of their support services potentially retracted, certainly in the higher lockdown areas. You know, just sort of getting through each day and surviving is quite possibly the reality. And you know, when do you even have time to go and create these moments of spaciousness? Have you got anything to say about time availability or ways that we can do it whilst we're still holding the busyness of life and the things that need to be done for others?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can appreciate that to a certain degree, being a single mum, 3 kids at home, homeschooling, juggling work, but, you know, and also when you add to that other stresses of, you know, being the sole carer for somebody, even just being absolutely committed to the daily task of, you know, whatever it is that might demand your time, you literally have no time left. So it's actually finding micro moments in your day to implement some of this self-care. So whether that be stuff that is just grabbing 3 minutes to do that little meditation that you find on the internet. The body scan is fantastic. You can find little things on the net. You know, just have your cup of tea and drink it mindfully. You know, add that teaspoon of honey and taste it. Sometimes that is all you can hope to achieve, is the flavor of a good sip of tea, and noticing that as it goes down your body. So just finding the moments to embody the small pleasures in life, until you can create room, or there's room for that walk or that kind of time out in nature, or that drive that you've been dying to do for ages. But yeah, it's a difficult one, and I don't pretend to have any answers. Does anyone else have any suggestions or creative ideas around that?
I'm not sure if this is in response to that particular question, but I've got some more comments here coming in from YouTube. So we've got soaking in a bubble bath after I get home from working with my hospice clients, who are beautiful people, and it's a joy and an honour for me to spend time with them. I feel I'm doing something worthwhile. So again, I think that's a beautiful, thank you so much for that comment. That's such a beautiful expression of, when we're carers because we care. and there are many opportunities and moments of joy, as much as there are moments of it can be draining and overwhelming at times. So again, finding those moments of joy and meaning. And I love your comment there about, I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. To me, that's such a wellbeing tool. Find something in your life where you feel like you're doing something worthwhile and meaningful.
Absolutely. That kind of is one of the things that, the questions that has emerged over social media is, who do I want to be in this pandemic? So that's really about getting in touch with values, and often when we care for others, the joy comes back to us. But what you said before is, we care because we care, and we also hurt because we care, and we care because we hurt. And so where there is joy, there is pain, and it's kind of like this duality of life that we experience. So when there's a gap between what we've got and what we want, we're hurting, and we hurt because we care. So dropping into that value of, I'm actually someone who really cares, is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And we've got another comment here from Carol, who likes to hand stitch or weave. She thinks it's the rhythmic motion that syncs with her breath. How beautiful.
That is gorgeous. Absolutely. I can see that now. I do this.
And I do this when I'm feeling out of control. Touch your thumb to each of your fingers, starting with the pinky, and repeat with the mantra, peace starts with me. Oh,
wonderful.
That's beautiful.
I love
Ange.
that.
Yeah, me too.
I'm going to write that one down, Ange. That's lovely.
Yeah, I love that. There are also lots of, and Shobie's going to refer us to a couple of resources at the end here, but there's so much out there on the internet, and I know sometimes it's a bit of a minefield and it's hard to know how to pin it down, but we have done a little bit of work at the library, and we've got some resources on our website to help people through this COVID time. Some of those resources are pure and simple things like a book. A book's a great idea sometimes for a bit of downtime. You can have talking books in the bath, but we've also got some activities and links to other resources as well on our website. So do check that out. It's we'll get Stuart to pop up the link to the Goldfields Library website as well. You don't have to do this alone. From YouTube, another comment. Second person who's recommended phosphorescence today. I think I'll have to get a copy. Wish my library was open, wink, wink. So do we. We'll be soon.
Excellent.
In a manner of speaking.
Absolutely.
And Carol's just said phosphorescence is available on Borrow Box as an audio book.
Oh, great. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, someone send
the library website too. So
what a wonderful community here, here, and the gratitude that we can experience here in this moment.
That's right. Great. So we are coming towards the end. I'd love to see if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask Shobi directly. Thanks so much for your sharing and participation. It's quite a weird format, this online Zoom meeting, when you're in a sort of workshop style, vulnerable, courageous sharing moment, to be doing it via a chat box and blank screens for Shobi as well. It's tough, I think, facilitating a session to blank screens because you're not quite sure how it's landing. So thanks everyone so much for kind of leaning into this reality that we're operating out of. And if you do have some questions, now's the time to ask them of Shobi. And just thanks, Susie, for popping on your camera. We'll get to you in a minute. Just from Gordon, though, quick comment here. Such a strong connection between physical choices and actions, and where my mind goes, the dance of mind and body.
Absolutely. Yep, that's right.
And Carol's just given some lovely feedback. It's landing beautifully. Thank you. Thanks, Carol. That's lovely. Susie, would you like to ask a question?
No, I just wanted to turn my camera on. I do virtual meetings through work, and I had one today where I was talking to a blank screen, so you actually can't read how your audience is going and the silence that follows. But thank you, and you've had some really good tips and tricks that I'll follow up on. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Susie. It's an absolute pleasure. It's lovely to just be here to be able to share this stuff and to hear from you guys as well. And I'm just so relieved that none of us have to be masked, even if we can't see each other. It's just good. It's landing beautifully for me. Thank you, Shobi. Oh, yeah, we've seen that. Thank you so much, Carol. And thanks for providing that feedback. That's wonderful. Is there any other questions around, or any specific questions around anything that anyone wants to ask before I point you to a few great little resources online?
If no one else has got one, I've got a slightly random one, but I'm aware that I've maybe spoken too much. I'd love to see something from somebody else, but while we're waiting, if it's not too complex, I wonder, I have a tendency towards positivity, which some would say is a great coping mechanism, but I think I've become aware recently that it's a dampening mechanism. Like, I'm refusing to watch the news and feel it, and I'm refusing to allow myself to go to the devastation of what I'm seeing and hearing. And I saw somebody shared an article recently on Facebook called Toxic Positivity. And I thought, oh God, they're probably talking about me. I'm the one always trying to put positive things on Facebook. Maybe I'm just riding right over the top. I wonder if you've got a comment about that.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. From Oprah Winfrey to whatever we've heard from our childhood, it's, put your shoulders back, stop crying, be happy, this kind of perception that we can control what we feel. And therefore, positive thinking is a massive kind of, strategy that people use in order to be able to combat this kind of feelings of stress and, and that is quite the done thing. So I wouldn't actually feel, even I have my little mantras that I check myself on sometimes, and I think, is this really doing anything? And the idea around positive thinking is that it's not necessarily a negative thing, but that the way to achieve happiness is not by pursuing the goal of happiness, but by undermining avoidance, by undermining catastrophizing, by undermining the things that seek to hook us, because of this biological predisposition to creating doubt and uncertainty that we have. So understanding that we are not defective when we create these negative thoughts, but that our mind is doing its job to keep us safe. So by creating acceptance and the awareness of those negative thoughts and feelings, we actually reduce their frequency and intensity and actually find ourselves fusing with fantasy and positive things more, often. That's the word I was looking for. So that's really an interesting comment that you make there, but it's something that all of us have been wired to do. And that's just by the way we've been grown up and nurtured in the society.
Yeah, it's a really interesting reframe for me. I think that'll be my biggest takeaway from tonight. Thanks, Shobi. I appreciate that. We haven't got any questions that have come through, so I think we'll hand over to you to do a bit of a wrap-up, some resources that people can go to from here.
Yeah, sure thing. Was that a hand up, Susie? Just to make sure. No, that wasn't. Okay, so there's a couple of resources that I would love to point you to. Now, the first one is if you are feeling as though things are becoming too much, and this happens at times from time to time, 1 in 2 adults at some point in their lives will have suicidal ideations and thoughts of suicide. That's just a really real thing that can happen, and that's a statistic. If you're having these feelings of, suicidal thoughts or ideation, then I encourage you to ring Lifeline. That's an important go-to, or you tell somebody close to you. The second thing is if you're seeking a more interactive way of engaging with your issues, then there are many, many things available to you online. And one of them that I'd like to recommend is the Act Mindfully website, ACT Mindfully. If you click on Act Mindfully and click on free stuff, you'll find a whole bunch of audio meditations, videos, little cartoons that can help you kind of navigate this time of stress and uncertainty. You want to write that one down? That's a fantastic one. The third one is that I'd like to give a plug because it is coming up, and there is a couple of groups in Bendigo as well as an online group. And it's called GROW, Grow. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of this, but it's based on the old school 12-step recovery program. And it's born out of 60 years of experience of overcoming our problems by coming together and hearing from collective wisdom. So it's a mental health 12-step recovery group, and they've just opened free online groups that you can attend from anywhere in Australia. So that is a fantastic weekly free program that you can engage with. And there's a beautiful saying that I'd love to share from the GROW program. And the quote says, "Settle for order in lesser things for the sake of order in greater things, and therefore be content to be discontent in many things." And that's just one of the beautiful collective wisdoms that you can share. And there are things that you are able to engage in on a weekly basis. If you're looking for a great book, aside from Phosphorescence, which has had a good plug tonight, The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris, where a lot of my material comes from, is a fantastic, fantastic book to read. And it talks about this whole idea of why we're biologically predisposed to create stress and what is this elusive happiness trap. What's the opposite of stress? Is it happiness or is it something else? It's a really beautiful exploration with practical tips and examples and ways to help yourself on a daily basis, and it's very transformative. So I do recommend The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. And aside from that, I think that was all I had in terms of that resources stuff.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Shobi. There's a lovely comment here from YouTube. Just wanted to say thank you to us both for our time and session. It's been extremely helpful and inspiring and much appreciated. And another lovely thank you from somebody on this Zoom chat, and thanks also to those who have shared their thoughts. And again, I do really appreciate that. I like your use of the term collective wisdom, Shobi, in relation to the GROW program, and these sessions are always richer for the contributions that people make in those comments and sharing. So thank you to everyone who has, and all of you, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evenings to show up on behalf of yourselves, to tap into some ideas and thoughts about how to really look after yourselves and take care of your well-being, giving yourselves permission and knowing that it's not a failure to be struggling, because it's, you know, very, very normal, not only at this time, but it's a normal part of being human, which is really probably, if I could summarize what Shobi's shared with us tonight, that would be my little take-home summary tips. So this has been an event hosted by Goldfields Libraries. We have what we're calling Library in Your Lounge Room series, which is basically we bring the library to you because we've had to close our libraries on and off throughout this year. And of course, our events won't be able to happen face-to-face for a little while yet. So we're running all sorts of different online offerings, workshops, as well as author talks, children's activities and children's story times. There's a plug for you, Georgina, and the other gorgeous story timers. And even if you don't have children, watch them because they're just absolutely precious and priceless. In fact, there's one on our YouTube channel this week for Father's Day, which was last weekend, by our CEO, Mark Hands, who was reading a book with his 7-year-old daughter Lola. So that's a gorgeous one to catch, and one for everybody. There really is something for everybody. There's family history, there's help with learning more about getting online and using your device, and we've even got devices available for loan for people who don't have their own devices. And so if you know anybody who could benefit from some support in connecting into the online world, for whom it might be all new, please do let them know that we have some devices on loan and some people around who can help connect people up. It's all about connection and community at this time. That's also a big wellbeing thing that we at Goldfields Libraries are taking very seriously. Another plug here in the chat, author talk with Christy Neiman coming up as well on Thursday night. So check that out on our events page on the website. And the last project I wanted to tell you about is called Life in Lockdown. And we're offering an opportunity for community members to reflect and share their experiences of lockdown. So there's various different things you can do. You can do a online postcard to the future around what normal was like in the past, what normal has been like during this time, and what you hope normal might look like in the world in the future. or you could write a letter to your pre-COVID self about perhaps some of the insights and awarenesses that you might have had about what's important at this time and what you hope to remember going forward when life does go back to so-called normal. And also we're just inviting people to share in any form, a creative outlet really. So photography, poetry, writing, however you'd like to share children's pictures and stories. And you can go to our website for more inspiration on how people have been sharing. And we hope to turn that into an exhibition and ultimately a book, because we think that generations to come are going to be very interested in our recording and reflecting on this time, which is a bit of a turning point in history. So thank you again, Shobi, so much for a really fantastic and important and timely evening, for giving us your time and your wisdom. I can feel that there's great depth of experience of holding space for people and leading them through dark times, and we really appreciate being the beneficiary of that tonight. Good luck, everybody. Take care of yourselves and take care of your loved ones, and enjoy awe and wonder and wellness. And we'll see you on the next online event, hopefully. Thanks very much.